the one that we're both most looking forward to, is the induction of, and this is amazing as well. We were talking last week about Thunderbolt Patterson, and then all of a sudden he's announced. Lord, Claude Thunderbolt Patterson.
Oh, if I could just, he leaned over, had my hat on. If I could just tell you what I'm going to do. I can't even tell. Oh, Lord. Because now, is he Hall of Fame worthy? Let me say that. Because he was just over in several places. He didn't tour the whole country. He was over in like mid-Atlantic, really over there. But I think where he was most over was Georgia, Atlanta. And I sent you a little bit of a brief rundown yesterday about Thunderbolt. So he came along about in the early 70s when I met him, when I was working in Atlanta. And he came along because the civil rights movement was just in its heyday. And Atlanta was like the center of it because you had Martin Luther King, of course, but he got assassinated in Memphis, I think in 68 or 69. I can't remember now.
68, I think, was the same year as Bobby Kennedy, wasn't it?
Yes, the same year, a couple of months apart.
Yeah.
Sure was. But the civil rights movement was really starting to find its legs. And of course, with Martin Luther King there. And then, you had some more Hosea Williams. I mean, if you're from Georgia, you know these names. Julian Bond was another one. Several more anyway, but they embraced Thunderbolt because everybody knew who Thunderbolt was. Because he would go on that TV and Thunderbolt, was he a good wrestler? Not no, but hell no. But people didn't care. He was like Dusty. Dusty was not a good wrestler, but they loved him to death. And Thunderbolt, they loved him to death in Atlanta and Georgia and all over the South. They loved him. So when he got there, all those civil rights leaders that I brought up, they were dying to meet Thunderbolt, and he was dying to meet them because he appealed to everybody. He appealed to his black constituents, and also the white audience ate him up. They loved him, especially when he went up against the big heel. And I had really never heard of Thunderbolt Patterson before I met him there in Georgia. And he was a good guy, good to me, but he drew some crowds, buddy. I mean, I would say Georgia, percentage wise, if you break down the demographics of race, I'd say Atlanta is over 60% African American. And we would go down to a city auditorium. Now, it wasn't that big a building, but it would probably get 5,000 people in there, and they would jam it out it'd be sold out at 7:15. It wouldn't start till like 8:30. 7:15, it sold out in a big line, and nobody could get in. Just because of, say, one interview that he would do on TV. And the people would jam it. They would pack it. But as in the case of a lot of things, sometimes they start delivering the wrong message. And I'm talking about wrestling now. It had nothing to do with the race, none of that stuff. But it had to do, he wanted to form a union. I do remember that. And of course, the promoters, they didn't want to hear that because now if you formed a union, and that's a whole other issue of its own. You couldn't form a union in the United States. I mean, and because the promoters actually, I think they would rather quit the business than be governed by a union. Because you'd have to have health care and you'd have to have this and you'd have to have that and you had to pay your performers X number of dollars. See, a wrestling promoter back in those days, they didn't have big TV income. What they did, if they say they would go to just to say a city in Georgia, say they would go to Macon, Georgia, well, the TV station didn't pay them nothing. The TV station would accept the show, but they wouldn't. They looked at it like an infomercial that you had the show to make money. I mean, you had the show on TV to make money at your house show in the town that week or around that town. So, and I think that Thunderbolt got in there, and after a while, he got so over that they got afraid of him. Because if he just stopped coming, their business would go right in the tank because they had built so much around him. Now, Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt, they would go round and round and round. And Ole would cuss him. And I don't think Thunderbolt cussed Ole, but he'd say, "My brother." Oh, that drove Ole up a wall. It was, but usually, I've heard him in a few arguments because Thunderbolt was trying to tell him this, and Ole was the booker, and oh, it was like Mutt and Jeff sometimes. But you'd have to hear them. They were hilarious, but didn't mean to be. But after a while, I think Thunderbolt actually was too radical for the wrestling business at the time.
He was like the Malcolm X of wrestling at the time, wasn't he? I guess.
I didn't bring up Malcolm X, but yeah, about that time, because there was a wave of activism started across the country, and eventually it got decided amongst the wrestling business, and I'm sure they all got together and says, "Don't bring Thunderbolt in. He's more trouble than all the sellouts that he can bring, because he will bring more discord and more, problems than what you can fix." So eventually, I think by 1979 or 1980, he was more or less out of the business, wasn't he?
Yeah. So pretty much retired in 1980. Came back for
now
a year in the mid 80s.
This would get me to watch the show that night, the Hall of Fame, just to see Thunderbolt. And I've seen Thunderbolt several times. He would if I was on a little show in Georgia, sometimes he would come and just hang around. I mean, he would know somebody there, and he had one eye that was, I don't know what happened to his eye, but his eye would go this way, and he would look forward with his other eye, and he would wear glasses, and very friendly, and always very nice to me, because he had no need to be not nice to me. I've worked with him a time or two, but working with him, you'd almost have a match with nothing. He'd do all the work. He'd stand over there and he'd do this and that, and the people you didn't have to do nothing, and just knock him down a time or two and get a little heat on him, and then he would start his comeback, and he would have the match almost by himself. I could have been a dummy over there, or anybody could have. But all he's got to do is he does his stuff, and his stuff was over. So, but congratulations to Mr. T-Boat. I think he's a surprise. He definitely is a surprise. I never expected in a month of Sundays that he'd ever be given a Hall of Fame induction.
I want to add a couple more things in. So he tried to start his own promotion against Jim Barnett, apparently, and even tried to go national in 1975. He, as you said, tried to start a union in the mid-70s, or maybe it was the mid-80s, anyway, at some point, with Jim Wilson, who I know was at one point an embittered pro wrestler.
Oh, he was. He was a former football player, Jim Wilson. And he got into business, and he was he wanted to run wrestling like they was trying to run football, and football was screwed up enough on its own. And I don't know how he got in the business, and he lasted about 2 years, I think, and he was gone. So, but him and Thunderbolt together, they were a good pairing, I would say.
A disruptive pairing, definitely. He lobbied, this is Thunderbolt, lobbied for equal pay and for state regulation like boxing, and also said in court, I think probably in the mid-'80s, I think this was, that wrestling was a show to try and either deregulate it or for whatever reason, just basically, I don't know what the end game was, I forget.
I cannot believe he would say that. He broke kayfabe.
I know, in the 80s.
What the hell? Well, it was kind of broke. And people said, "Hey, you can't tell the people it's fixed or this, that, and the other." I said, "I don't see why not." We show them every night we run a show. There's something that happens. They said, that's bullshit." So, tell them. Actually, we've told them now. Does it make a difference? Actually, business is up. It is show business.
I can't remember where I read this, and it was recently. Apparently, they did like in the 80s, or even it may have even been in the 70s. They did a poll of people in Georgia somewhere, and I'm going to get this completely wrong. And they asked the people, "Do you think wrestling is real or not?" And let's say it this way: 98% of them said no, it's not real. 1% said it is real, and 1% were undecided, and it didn't affect the box office.
See, people don't give a crap, and sometimes if you trust the people, they'll trust you. Just go out there and give them a show what they think they need. And what WWE, look at what WWE's done. They give them music, they give them the lights, they give them the characters, they give them the story. But the story can change, and that's what they draw money on. People said, "You think they should do more wrestling on the show?" I says, "No, I think they should do more story. Keep the wrestling the same, but give them the story." And what I've often said is what I would do. I would do the out of the studio segments. I would take the camera out on the street, and we would run a little vignette during the show, and it would start. I had a 2-hour show, and we would start it in the first 15 minutes, but we would carry it all the way through the show. WWE used to do that. That's where I got it. So, but you're telling a story behind the story, and I would have one like every 30 minutes. And I would end up usually at the very end of the show. If I didn't do anything else, I held until the end of the show to see how this vignette that I had constructed and built through the show, how it was going to end up. And it wasn't really serious. It was like a bullshit, segue of clips and all, but it was interesting. So you can get by with a lot of things. Boring, you can't get by with. They'll just go click. If I want to be bored, I can sit here and look at myself.
I'll end with the Thunderbolt portion here. Ole Anderson wrote in his 2003 book, Inside Out, about Thunderbolt. He thinks you're being prejudicial for anything you do. If you say hello, you're being prejudicial. If you say goodbye. So I think Ole's thing was that Thunderbolt was pretty sensitive, but we can't leave the Thunderbolt portion without saying, if you move. If you move.
Lord.
If I only had time. I've had enough here. They are really entertaining. They're really entertaining.
And that was his interview.